Welcome to Cambodia Business Week. Today is an interesting day for us. I think it's our last show on Radio 1 for Cambodia Business Week, which is, I'm sad to say, after a 2.5-year run of doing Cambodia Business Week, where Radio 1 is going to temporarily at least cease operations and rethink itself. But you are my last guest on Cambodia Business Week.
Well, thank you very much for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Yes, and thank you. I wanted to have you on, James, because, well, first let me introduce you, James Hodge, CBRE.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, thank you for coming. I wanted to have you on because real estate is a very, very topical topic, if I could use the words.
Yep.
And it's not only the Cambodians that talk about it, the Khmers that talk about it, but expats talk about it, because there's a very large expat market, not only for what I would say residential, but also for offices, also for retail. It's come across now for both Khmers and for foreigners as being very interesting what's going to happen in the real estate market. Yeah. And you have put out a fearless forecast. Can you tell us about the fearless forecast?
Well, the fearless forecast is an event that we hold annually. And we try to put out as much detail as we can about where we think the real estate market in Cambodia is going to go in the next 12 months, as well as looking back at where we've been, because obviously we can't really forecast without knowing where we've come from. So we try to put out as much as we can. We try and tell a story because we know that real estate affects everyone. Everyone has got to have somewhere to live, somewhere to work, somewhere to shop, somewhere to meet their friends, and we find that it's an interesting topic. That's why we love it so much.
Well, this presentation is extremely well done, and it's 54 pages. So I'm going to go through the highlights, if you don't mind. First, I think we have to congratulate the Kingdom of Cambodia, because you've put out a Cambodia dashboard, and we've looked at economic indicators, and the GDP from 2012 of $14.1 billion is now almost double. It's almost $26 billion.
Yeah.
And we're talking about 6 years, 7 years?
The growth is absolutely astounding.
And what's driving this GDP growth? I know you're not an economist, but you have some insights that you could tell us a bit?
Well, we're coming from a very low base, right, and we're coming into a period of time where there's an awful lot of money in the region. So a lot of this has been external investment, as well as Cambodian businesses picking up, modernization of the economy, and moving into different sectors. So construction in particular has been a solid driver of growth, and that ties back into obviously the real estate sector.
Right. So it's been consistently growing around 7% a year. You know, in between 7.1, 6.9, but around 7% a year, which is, I think, has been a very strong track record for over 25 years, with the exception of blips and when things were really bad, like 2008.
Absolutely.
But even then, there was growth.
Yeah.
So it's, the kingdom is amazing. It shouldn't be amazing Thailand. It should be amazing Cambodia.
Yeah. Well, we compare regularly against other countries in the region, and Cambodia's stability, its growth, that usually always puts it in the top 1 or 2 performers.
And it's there was this famous, probably now infamous saying that was in the U.S. called trickle-down economics, which was Ronald Reagan's economic concept. But what is also striking is that the per capita, meaning the average person's capita, is increased from 973 to 1.5 thousand, which is meaning that it's this lower middle class is developing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which helps the housing market. So we're going to have a segue, which does help the residential housing market because
it does.
They could afford it now.
Yeah, absolutely. Disposable income is growing. They're able to better afford usable items like cars, and as well as that, fixed asset investment like houses.
Good. And you're seeing a greater one of the indicators in countries that is watched by governments is the percentage of the population that actually owns houses. So I guess that's all housing or condos. I guess that's also on the increase.
It's already very high in Cambodia. What we generally find is people love to own land, and that is a major asset class here. So it's already high, but we see that moving up in terms of the quality of construction. The type of building is changing. So maybe we're moving from standalone buildings into an organized development like a Boré. And now also a shift, especially in the younger middle class population, towards condominium living. Okay.
So when I mentioned real estate, and if somebody was driving the car, I didn't want them to turn the dial. So one thing, we're 5 minutes into the show, but I want you to tell everybody a little bit about yourself. And by the way, I'm Anthony Galliano, your host. There is an introduction that says I'm the host, so it should be no news to anybody.
No worries. So I am the Associate Director at CBRE Cambodia. I work predominantly now in investment, but also help out with our research consulting team, who are the guys, the very, very talented members of our staff who put together this amazing deck. I work also in some of our commercial brokerage teams, so mostly leading office leasing, and also the valuation department. So I got a pretty broad scope.
Background. Yeah, fantastic. Okay, well, thanks for the introduction. We're going to get back to the deck now, so people didn't turn the dial. You did, interestingly enough, you put infrastructure as sort of the second topic, I would say, after the economy. Absolutely. So I guess you're taking infrastructure very seriously as part of real estate in general, that it's important to have that infrastructure in place. Without
appropriate infrastructure, without the ability to move people, goods, and get services in and out of especially cities, it's really difficult to maintain growth, especially at high levels like 7% a year. So we need to see investment in infrastructure and improvements in infrastructure provision in order to ensure that 7% growth rate can
now be maintained. A little bit on the, let's say, concern side is a lot of this seems to be roads.
Absolutely.
And less on what would be public infrastructure, because I mean, look, we no doubtedly have pretty bad traffic, and that's every city in Asia, with really very rare exception. And most big cities have it. Yeah. I mean, Los Angeles or Chicago, whatever. It has. This is a problem in cities globally. Yeah. And what you don't want to see is that we become like a Jakarta or a Manila, where it's just people spending hours in cars.
Sure.
It's very noticeable, the traffic now. One of the important things I think Thailand did, although Bangkok still has traffic, pretty bad traffic, is, you have to give them credit for the underground and for the SkyTrain, both which are heavily used.
Of course.
And Jakarta is finally coming out with theirs, but is there any hope that we'll get a public transportation system? Well, or we're just too small to do it? It's possible that, Phnom Penh is very small. Does it make sense?
It is very small, but it's growing very rapidly. And we can already see the problems with traffic. So as people's disposable income increases, they're able to buy more vehicles, and that'll start with bikes, and it goes through cars, and the cars get bigger, as we see on the streets of Phnom Penh every day. The traffic gets a little bit heavier, and we're battling through to get to work for a little bit longer. So infrastructure and road access is increasingly important, because the amount of investment required to put a public transportation system in is huge, billions and billions, and it takes a long time, and it needs to be studied properly in order to make sure that it works. So we know that study process is ongoing, and it's being led by JICA, which is always a good thing to see. They really do their homework, but it will take some time in order to see that come out of the ground and then make an impact for Cambodians.
You do mention some flyovers and ring roads, and I have to say, the flyovers do a lot of good value. That's for sure. I've noticed that when I was going to the airport before the flyovers existed.
Absolutely.
And they've done some quite amazing good things in cutting down your traveling time. Is there enough flyovers and underpasses to relieve the traffic situation?
The moment the overpasses and underpasses seem to be focusing on pinch points. So the next one that we're looking at with excitement actually is the Chom Chau roundabout overpass, because the traffic in that location can be quite extreme, and obviously that feeds back down through Russian Boulevard a little bit. So seeing that happening, it will help logistics and infrastructure in terms of industrial capacity, which will help to maintain economic growth. And that's really important as we increase the road capacity with the highway down to Sihanoukville, which is under construction. The ring roads as well, at the moment, these are focused on ensuring that Phnom Penh's industrial capacity continues to grow. And it's incredibly important at getting goods and services around the city rather than into the middle of it. But of particular importance actually was the announcement a couple of weeks ago about cleaning up the roads in terms of parking situation and just ensuring a little bit more regulation.
It's going to be, that's going to be interesting. I'm from New York. We love to walk on the sidewalks. It's just impossible to. I think it's just culturally what's happened here. Yeah. But there is a lack of parking. So if the cars can't go on the sidewalk, where will they go? I think this is the question.
Yes, and a very key question, and that's a problem that real estate as a sector is having to face, because the investment required to build car parking as part of a development is quite significant, and that affects the profit that a developer can make. But I think we'll start to see public car parks, high-rise multi-storey car parks in strategic locations, and with more accessibility of walking, there's also less pressure on having to use a vehicle all the time.
Right.
So that will also aid the reduction in traffic, possibly.
So the last question on infrastructure. I got excited when I saw Cambodia opens the Thai border rail link. It looks like I could go to Thailand by train soon.
Yeah, absolutely. It might take you a little while, but it's
How
great.
long would it take?
That's a good question. It's quite a long journey, and the trains are not moving at particular speed at the moment. So once those speed up, and the railway's been fully bedded in, then it's quite exciting. But I think at the moment it's largely for freight traffic.
Okay, I think the interest in projects for what's called satellite cities, which are very popular in some Asian cities. So I think for the audience, what is a satellite city and what's coming on that would be interesting as a satellite city?
Yeah. So a satellite city is a planned development. So this would usually be a greenfield site on the edge of another metropolis, and that in this case being Phnom Penh. A satellite city would generally have good infrastructure already, because you're able to build from fresh. You're not having to live with something that you inherited maybe from colonial period or previously, where infrastructure is limited in terms of capacity. So it's a more modern version of an urban area. And the planning that you're able to put in place ensures that you get pre-designed mix of uses and building types, which can create a very attractive and efficient urban environment. We've got 3 major satellite cities that we're tracking at the moment, but there are others on the edge of Phnom Penh, in particular the Choi Chang Ba satellite city, the ING satellite city at the south of Phnom Penh, and there's a couple of others like Diamond Island. You've got the Harbour Bay project, Phnom Penh City Centre. These are all more integrated, but the big ones would be Choi Chang Ba and ING.
That's very positive to hear. I do recall when I first came here, there was some talk of satellite cities, but what had happened was the development was pretty slow.
Yeah.
And maybe that was just due to housing demand, but they were sort of far out.
Yeah.
You know, you had to drive 30 minutes,
Sure.
which is not unusual for big Asian cities. But has things changed where people have a higher degree of confidence that these things will develop and they'll put their money down to say, I want to be there?
Yeah, and that confidence word is always really important when it comes to an investment of the scale of a satellite city. People have got to be sure that there's sufficient demand in order to invest what will likely be several $1 billion in most cases of overall investment. Now that may come from one player, it may come from multiple sectors, and that's usually the case here, in that we're looking for a range of investors in order to deliver a satellite city, and there's one master planning developer behind it. So it's interesting to see that that's coming in, and that's certainly because Cambodia's, from an international perspective, the investment is now much greater in terms of volume and broader in terms of where it's coming from, and that helps certainly to deliver.
What's, of course, interesting to me is where is the money coming from? Is it public, or is it these cities like ING we know is Cambodian? But I mean the other ones that are developing, is it public? Which country it's coming from, or who's developing, or is it Cambodian?
Largely, actually, we see private corporations investing initially in the infrastructure that's required to deliver a satellite city. So putting roads, telecoms, this sort of thing in. And there's some very interesting projects going on at the moment, including a smart city concept that we're quite excited about. In terms of the rest of the investment, obviously that's coming from private areas as well. Nationalities are quite mixed, mostly, but not in all cases. Some is Cambodian delivered, but overseas certainly play a very important role in supporting satellite cities because the amount of investment required is so huge.
Okay, so I'm going to get on to probably something the audience has been waiting for, talking about residential housing. So, of course, the striking number is, which I saw also was published in the newspapers here, 120% more supply of condominiums is coming on the market this year.
Yes.
How's that possible? How is it possible to have 120% more supply of condominiums? Was everybody developing at the same time, the same cycle?
A lot of that, yes, is true. But we also have to remember that in Phnom Penh, we're coming from a very low base. So when I arrived here in 2016, we were about 4,000 condominium units, which is a very low number for a city of the size of Phnom Penh. And now we're at just over 14,000, and we should be heading up to about 30,000 by the end of this year.
I guess the context would be, okay, we have 14,173 of which most of them mid-range.
Yep.
About 50%.
Yeah.
And only 25% are high-end and affordable.
Sure.
How does that compare with our population and the number of condo units to a Bangkok? I mean, maybe this is a little of a math question, I guess, or Jakarta, or a Manila or a Hong Kong.
Sure.
I mean, it seems like a very small number, but again, the population isn't. We don't have 20 million people.
Yeah.
In Phnom Penh, I think we have 1.5 million these days, if I'm right.
Yeah.
Something
That's
like that.
About right. Yeah.
So Hong Kong's 8 million.
Sure.
Jakarta and these other cities are 20-30 million. Sure. So how does that compare with the supply versus the population?
Well, the context of Phnom Penh is very different from a starting point. Traditionally, condominium living hasn't been particularly popular, and we know Cambodians love to buy land, and Boré has been the focus previously. As the city becomes more dense and we have issues with infrastructure like traffic, living in the city centre becomes more important. So the number of condos needs to grow in order to support demand, and as we see more expatriates and living in the city, condominium living is important for them. They like to be close to services and their workplace, and usually they're in a smaller household, so a condominium can work quite well. In terms of supply, the numbers compared to regional cities is still quite small. We're supplying this year about half the number of condos that we would generally see in somewhere like Ho Chi Minh City. In terms of population, that number is pretty strong growth for Phnom Penh, but we're still coming from a very low base. So there's still demand out there for occupation of condominiums. But it's about targeting it right, I think.
So the obvious question is, who's going to buy? Because you're like you said, you're bringing on another 15,000 units.
Of course.
We see these condominiums going up, and now they're ready to be occupied. And against the current demographics, is there still a lot of foreign ownership in these condominiums, correct?
Yes, absolutely correct. It depends upon the development itself. A foreign developed condominium unit development will generally have a pretty high proportion of foreign buyers. That might be up to 60 or even 70%, which is the cap. Yep.
Do they live in these condominiums, or are they just buying it for investment?
Occasionally, and sometimes, yes, they're buying for, obviously, investment.
So there's still maybe a lot of empty condominiums?
Well, there are condominiums which will be leased in the market.
Right.
So we have to look at the occupational market as well as the investment market. And it will be expatriates or Cambodians, young Cambodians who will occupy as a renter rather than buying.
So I guess one of the things that will be important for this is that the banking sector has to help out a bit here.
Yeah.
That it's not the easiest thing to get a mortgage comparative, which is not a bad thing. I mean, to give the NBC credit.
Yeah.
I think how that market's been regulated has been extraordinarily helpful to avoid any crises that we've seen in other.
Absolutely.
I think in just Western countries, we talk about when is the bubble going to burst, like it's expected, and when is the credit crisis going to hit, like it's expected. So to give credit to the NBC, we haven't seen that. It hasn't been a problem. You still, I think, have to put down like 40% of the deposit, and you have to show 3 or 4 times your income flow to pay the mortgage.
Yeah. Yeah.
So is the banking system going to help here? Because you said young Cambodians are going to be probably one of the segments that would be buying this.
Yeah.
So it's either they're lucky to get family money or they have to borrow.
So we haven't seen too much lending at the moment from banks into the condominium sector unless that condominium has already been developed, and that is partly to do with the titling system. So the strata title for the condominium obviously isn't issued until that condominium is complete, and the bank will not be so comfortable lending when they don't have a title that they can hold as part of their collateral. Will they help? Yes, we hope so, and there are certainly some out there who are willing to lend, and there are a few projects in the city where it is possible to get finance to buy. Actually, often, and Urban Village is a great example of this, where they've leveraged their own ability to lend to their buyers, and that has really helped young Cambodians to purchase. So yes, financing definitely a key issue in order to ensure affordability, and it has been a bit of a sticky problem and probably hasn't helped Cambodians get into this sector, but equally, it's really insulated the banks from any potential oversupply issues that we might see in the future.
Okay. In looking at the growth that is being forecast, this 120% year-on-year increase that is on the presentation, it's striking that the high-end market's going to grow the most.
Yeah, absolutely.
And why is that? Are people getting that rich?
So I think this is to do with timing. So these projects were launched in 2015 and the start of 2016. They're now getting to the point where they're completing. And at that time, the high-end sector was not seen as being oversupplied because a lot of projects came on stream at a similar time period. They're also quite well focused in the centre of the city, particularly Chamkomon district, Tony Basak and BKK1 in particular. So those locations generally have higher land prices, and therefore the developer has to build something slightly higher end in order to realise the same level of return. But what we're seeing now in the current wave of new supply which is coming in, so that developments which have been announced recently, is more of a shift towards mid-range and affordable, largely in secondary locations where land price is a bit cheaper.
There doesn't seem to be a very dramatic difference, at least currently, between mid-range and high-end square meter prices. There is for sure on the low end, yeah. But I mean, I think looking at this chart here, it's basically $500 different per square meter, which is not a very large percentage difference.
It's not, no. We can look at the supply in a number of ways, but the differences between an average mid-range condominium and an average high-end condominium are probably not as great as you might see in some other markets here. So that will change, because the high-end stuff that we're seeing coming through is slightly on the upper end, and we're seeing that high-end price start to tick up because of that. Whereas mid-range is starting to to flatten off a little bit, or maybe even drop down in some areas as newer, slightly lower priced units come to the market. So it's about targeting from the developers. What price do they think is achievable in Cambodia, and therefore that dictates where we will set, where we see those prices going.
So it seems there'll be stability in the high end, a little bit decline in the mid-range, and an increase in the low end. Or is it called low end, or the
affordable?
Affordable.
Sector.
Okay, sorry to use the right words. The affordable. Are you shocked also by some of the high-end prices? I have to say, I was doing a little shopping around, and this $3,250 seems a little optimistic for what you say is the average price. I mean, I think we're seeing as high as 4 and 4+ in some buildings.
Yes, absolutely. It's not uncommon in BKK1 to see units of $3,600 to $4,000 a square meter. That's quite common.
Is very different than some other Asian cities, is that correct?
It's quite a bit lower than you would find in a prime district in Ho Chi Minh City or in Bangkok. So it's still considered internationally to be pretty affordable.
Okay, well, that's good to hear. We haven't gotten to the stratosphere yet.
Not yet.
All right. So you see some stability in prices even with the condo supply doubling. And that's because it was coming from a low base. Is that sort of the summary?
What generally affects the prices here is more to do with a new supply coming on stream. So new launches of condominium development. That will affect the pricing because developers generally stick with the price they set at the start, which is the quoting prices which are reported there. What you'll find is there's more negotiation, obviously, on those prices as the market has more supply, more competition.
I think a lot of folks will be interested in what's actually coming on, because you list about 11 and say M more, which means there is quite coming on. And a good deal of these are, as you said, more in the BKK, Chakamon, and Tonle Sap area. So without being partial, what's interesting that's coming on, and where that you would sort of say this is a nice project? I'm sure there's people in the audience saying, "Okay, I'm looking for some place." So it's coming soon, and I mean, what sort of not by being biased as recommending them, but I mean, what's interesting? I guess is the words we could use.
Yeah, I think there's plenty of really interesting developments out there at the moment. There's quite a wide range now, obviously, because the numbers have been going up, and the developers here are getting more experienced. So we've seen some pretty good success at the Embassy Central development, which is in BKK1. So if you're looking for a high-end development in a central location, that's great there. They've got some really good experience now, having delivered Embassy Residence. Good project too. And we're dealing with a project called Le Trait, which is a Japanese building, also BKK1, which is targeted largely at investors, actually, because the units are very leasable. And that will be delivered towards next year. In terms of more affordable projects, there's a project called J Tower 2, which is in the south of BKK1, which is also very accessible in terms of pricing. And I mentioned earlier Urban Village, another project which is of interest. But there's plenty out there to have a look at. And definitely buyers should contact an agent or do a lot of shopping around. Check which one suits them the best.
Always shop around.
Absolutely.
Let me ask you about it's just by its name and it's the number of units. The penthouse resident, 458 units, which is not a lot, and high end expected third quarter. What's happening with this penthouse residence?
Okay, this is opposite Sofitel Hotel, so close to Aeon 1. Great looking building. They've got I think the first revolving restaurant in Cambodia is going to be on the top of that building. So it'd be great to go up there. It's very high rise actually for the location. It should be a great view of the river.
And the one that looks tremendous, I mean, just, I don't know how many buildings, is this one park. 1,636 units, high end.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a mixed-use project. SCIA School is already operating from that location. They've got a retail podium there, which is pretty substantial. So the services that are available on site, quite exciting. There's a hotel going in, Oakwood Service Department, also going. So that will be the second international branded service apartment operator in Phnom Penh, or actually in Cambodia. So quite exciting to see Oakwood entering the market at one part.
Oakwood's fantastic.
Yeah.
How fast we're growing. It's like having a child that's growing so fast. It's amazing how fast.
Absolutely.
Okay, we're going to move on to offices. I guess if people want more information, you're contactable at CBRE. Right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
Just give
Because
us a call.
I think
log
a
on
lot
to
of
our
people are
website.
looking. The one question everybody will ask, of course, is it the right time to buy? I don't know if there's ever a right time, but is it the right time to buy a condo?
Well, I think there's plenty of opportunity out there at the moment, and there's good negotiation to be had in many instances. So it's definitely worth having a conversation, seeing whether you can find something which is the right fit for you, whether you like the look of it. And at the moment, it's a major asset class for investment. So if you're looking for somewhere to put your money with a steady return, then definitely have a chat with a professional agent like the guys at our residential team.
So I dabble in taxes a little bit, and the law of financial management that was released in December, I think it sort of referred to the possibility there'll be personal taxes.
Yeah. And
possibly on second properties.
Quite possibly, yes.
Have you is there anything that you could let the cat out of the bag that you've heard on this?
We believe that there's something coming, and that's not unexpected, given the maturity of the market and how quickly it's growing. So
it'll be like a capital gains tax.
Yeah.
Probably on a second property rather than a first.
We would expect so.
On a second, but not on the first. It's still safe on the first?
Well, we'll wait and see.
Okay. Well, I mean, it's probably about time we had personal income taxes in Cambodia. So that's I know now that everybody likes to hear about it. Nobody wants to, but sure. It's the country's matured enough where we need personal income taxes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so I'm really happy to see the condo market will be stable, at least from your forecast, and prices will be either slightly up or about even. So the concern when you see the headline that it's going to double 100 or 120%, you shouldn't be concerned because you see stability in prices, and absolutely the market's capacity to absorb it's there.
The biggest risk actually lies in the occupational market. So it's, can you find a tenant for your building or for your unit? And that's going to come down to rental prices. So we think the biggest risk actually is looking at where rental prices are going to go.
And if there is going to be a drop, how much are you looking at for a drop in rental prices?
Well, scarily actually, in Q2 2018, we saw a 12% drop in some of the sectors. That recovered slightly in Q3, but Q2 was a particular high point in terms of demand, in terms of new supply completing in the market. So if we see significant volumes of supply, we do expect a drop in that, and that could be over 10% this year.
Is there any safe areas?
Some safer than others. We think BKK1, BKK2 and BKK3 should all be okay, and probably Tonle Basak as well. Those central areas with good access to people's workplaces and decent infrastructure. Yeah, we think they're probably a little safer.
Okay, normally I would say we're going to go into a little bit more of a boring subject. It would be more specific to people in the business.
I wouldn't say so. It's my favorite
I got to tell you,
one.
it's not a boring subject at all. We have conversations on this because I have my service office business.
Absolutely.
And it's for us, we haven't seen so much demand than we're seeing now. There's just a lot of demand for offices.
Yep.
And it's, to be honest, personal experience, looking for office space is very difficult. Yep. Even with the supply that's coming on. So, and there's a pretty high occupancy rate, about 80%, 78.5%. Is that considered high in a city?
It is for Phnom Penh. Historically, our vacancy rate has been considerably higher than it is at the moment. It really depends in which sector you're looking. So if you're in grade A, we assess it as being about 30% at the moment. So there's still good supply there. But once you're in the grade B or the grade C sector, it's a little tricky to find anything which is over 200 square meters.
Yeah. So I didn't get the 120% number here. So how is office supply going to grow?
It's also quite strong. In fact, In the next 12 months, we expect growth to be the most substantial we've seen in Phnom Penh. It will grow roughly 180,000 square meters over the course of the next 12 months, but that is split into two sectors. So we have the centrally owned buildings, which is what Phnom Penh's used to, so they're owned by one landlord, and then we see strata title starting to come into Phnom Penh.
A strata title means that you own that office like a condo, right?
Yeah, it's very similar to a condo. So you have an office floor, it's broken down usually into smaller units, and those are sold to individual investors.
Okay. And is that popular? I'm missing the boat on this one. I should know. Is that popular in other cities?
It has been, yes, particularly in Hong Kong and in China. It's a very popular model, as well as Taiwan. It hasn't worked so well in Bangkok in the past, but the market has matured greatly since strata title was first introduced to Bangkok. So we wait to see how it performs because it's a new sector, but it's bringing forth some quite exciting office developments, and some of them look really good.
All right, so I think there are a lot of small business owners in town, for sure, and there are always a lot of people looking for offices. It is a challenge. I didn't see much on the service office business, although I'm not trying to pick your brains on this interview. But I mean, I know Regus is doing a good job expanding their operations, but do we see other brands coming in and start offering this type of service?
There are a few brands out there now, and certainly I think the market is more interesting to others because of the expansion that we're seeing generally, both in terms of supply.
It's a good business. I'm not welcoming competition, but it's a good business.
And in terms of demand, so supply and demand both increasing in this sector, and having a flexible space solution is really important. And we're starting to see that regionally as well, with the rise of co-working operators like WeWork. Now, they're not here yet, but we're starting to see some coming in from overseas. So Tung, who are a Vietnamese operator, they'll be here shortly, I believe. Okay. And it's quite exciting to see co-working starting to become part of the office mix. In Phnom Penh, it offers people another option, a different way of working.
Okay. All right, so I guess your forecast on pricing would be helpful, because I think when you talk about office space, you do talk about square meter pricing.
Yeah, we do. Absolutely.
I mean, that's how I look at it as well. Yeah. So grade A, I think the occupancy you said isn't really high in grade A yet.
Yeah, but it's still only made up of two buildings. So Vatanak Capital Tower and Exchange Square. As far as CBRE are concerned, that's
that's 56 point. Oh, sorry. What's the percentage occupancy rate now of those?
Between the two, it's around 30% vacancy rate.
Oh, vacancy
rate. 70% occupancy rate.
All right. So is that good or bad comparatively?
Well, comparatively, it's the best we've seen in the market, and it keeps improving a lot. So start of 2018, the vacancy rate was about 45%. It's dropped considerably over the course of the last 12 months, and we expect that to possibly pick up over the next 12 months. There's no centrally owned grade A supply coming for the next 18 months at least, so it has a great opportunity to fill the remaining space in those two buildings.
Okay. And square meter pricing range for those guys are in the 30-something range, right?
Yeah, on average, they're about 31.
It's not too bad.
But we see them starting at 28.
Okay, yeah. That's pretty reasonable for. Does that include the admin fees and all the other stuff? Or?
You pay service charge on top,
right.
$5 a square meter, but for the quality of the space that you're offered, in comparing those to regional prices, apart from KL, they're actually very reasonable.
Okay. Grade B, I guess, is really the most popular segment.
Grade B, yeah.
And C.
Yeah, Grade C at the moment has the lowest vacancy rate, so that's about 5.5% currently.
Wow.
It's very low.
Really, and what's the average price for Grade C?
Grade C is running at between 12 and 15 on average.
There's still buildings at 12 and 15?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So they are still out there, but as you say, it's really difficult to find the stock. Right. So if you want anything even over 100 square meters, it's tricky to find. Grade B is where the new supply is coming, mostly. Okay. So
that would be 25, 28?
Yeah, 25, 28, usually a little bit less. 21 to 24 is more of the ballpark. You also get a lower service charge in both Grade B and Grade C.
Okay. So price is stable there as well?
Price is stable for the central business district, but as soon as we start going into more secondary areas, I think there's a bit of pressure because of the amount of supply that's coming on over the next 12 months.
So from your graph, it's A looks good, looks like it will increase.
Yep.
B will go down a little bit, C will be stable,
Yeah.
D stable.
Yeah, it's grade C at the moment. There's not a lot coming in, especially in secondary locations. I think they're probably going to be under a little bit of pressure because the quality of the office space. I think most tenants now, with the need to retain staff, and they need a slightly higher quality office. And grade B meets fire regulations and other things which are becoming much more important for office occupiers. So grade B's popularity is definitely growing, and that could take away slightly from grade C, but grade C doing brilliant work over the last 12 months. Really very low vacancy and tough to find anything.
I know the feeling. We're in one of those. Talking about what's coming on. So again, you have listed 12. What's interesting? I use interesting because we know you're not going to be biased.
Well, one of the most interesting is probably the Gateway, which is on Russian Boulevard. It's grade A strata title office building. Very nice design. You'll all have seen it coming up close to Phnom Penh Mega Mall. Very interesting location, great looking building. We really hope that becomes a bit of a signpost for entering the CBD district. As well as that, there were some really interesting projects which have come through. So
now I see TK Central. Now, the only reason I say that is we went through condos, we went through projects. We didn't talk much about Tul Cork.
We haven't, have we?
And Tul Cork was topical about 2 years ago. Like Tul Cork was going to be the growing area, but we haven't talked about Tul Cork. Why is that?
We certainly will talk about Tul Cork when we get onto land prices, because it's been the real star for the last 12 months. And it's definitely becoming a focus for more projects as well. So we see more commercial buildings being launched there, and there are two in particular in Tul Cork to mention. TK Central, as you said, which is a lovely looking traditional centrally owned grade B office building. And the Commune, which is a really innovative campus-style development on the northern half of Tul Cork, a bit closer to Aeon 2. And it's like a mini Google office. Very exciting. We look forward to working with them.
Right, so it's all encouraging. A lot of supply.
Yeah.
Stable prices. Wow. That's great to hear. Diamond Twin Towers. Strata title is something you seem to be quite...
Strata title, yeah, there's certainly a lot of it. And it's an interesting way of developing an office building and financing development of a major commercial building, because these things aren't cheap to build. There are some challenges for strata title, particularly because it's new in the market, and the structures around occupation of it need to be developed fully, and management of the building is also really important. So the ownership model is different. It's owned by a collection of different investors rather than one person, and therefore control needs to be thought about and implemented properly, and there has to be proper legal regulations to
and we
manage that.
We have the laws in place in Cambodia for this?
Well, we have the strata title law. I think there are still some grey areas which need to be worked out, probably through experience, and that's what the market will face in the next 12 months. And that's a little bit of a challenge, but with the right structure put in place at the start, there's no reason why they can't rent very well.
Okay. And I know it's a trend on rent prices, but what would be sort of the payback period for doing something like this, as opposed, it's always buy or rent, right? So should you rent? Should you buy?
Sure.
What's the payback period about?
Well, if you're investing in an owner-occupied office space, your payback period would probably be over 10 years, but you get other benefits as well. So you get capital value increases rather than solely the rental increase.
And one of the issues, you heard all the pros and cons, but the issues are twofold, really. It's one, what if we grow?
Yeah.
And we're going to grow out of this space,
Sure.
so what happens then? And the other issue is our business may not survive 10 years.
yeah. But what we generally find with strata title here is it's, in some cases, it is bought by owner-occupiers, but largely they're bought by investors. So the investor will be renting to them into the market. But owner-occupation certainly is a way to go. If you have a very stable, mature business, you don't think that, say, your staff numbers will grow too strongly, then owner-occupation can be a way to go. You're not paying for someone else's mortgage. You're investing in an asset, and some businesses do like that model. Others prefer the flexibility. So really, it's weighing up those differences.
So we could start to expect the REITs to come in here soon, right? Get us some exposure on Cambodia with the REITs. The REITs being real estate investment trusts, right?
Yeah.
That's probably a market that will start looking at this as well, I guess.
Well, certainly, there are more international investors looking at this market for good quality commercial assets. I think for a REIT in Cambodia in particular, it would need more development of our stock market, but it will come.
Hopefully, hopefully. We need more development of our stock market. Last part, I know you've done a great job. You've done a great job.
Well, we're nearly through the huge deck of slides.
Very, very interesting, and this is probably very happy to have you on that show to give this words of wisdom into the real estate market, which I'm sure people will listen to at the end of the year and say, was he right or not? Retail space.
Yeah.
With condominiums and the supply coming on there and the offices supplies coming on there, we need people to serve us burgers and give us nice fashionable clothes. And so
serve us coffee in the morning.
So retail space is very important. I see there's a lot of malls coming on.
There is a lot of malls coming on.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm sure the younger part of our population that's listening to
be
the
quite
audience.
excited, yes.
Can you tell us, without going into the pricing, because I think people are more interested in what's coming in where.
Yeah.
And what is it going to look like and what's it going to offer? Are they going to have cinemas or what else?
Yeah. Well, this year in particular, we're really quite excited again about the retail space. There's some innovative options that are coming through. So Chitmong have got Noro Mall, which is on Norodom Boulevard, close to CBRE's office at Keystone Building. Great looking project, has been leasing very well. Midtown Mall will be delivered in the middle of the year, and that's out on Street 2004, close to Northbridge School. Really great design, good tenant mixes. Other than that, there's some larger spaces like Olympia City Mall.
I saw a mega mall.
Through. Yeah, Phnom Penh Mega Mall.
What's this mega mall?
So Phnom Penh Mega Mall is a major 40,000 square meter retail development, which is on Russian Boulevard.
Is that the mall that was supposed to be developed by the Malaysian company?
That was meant to be occupied by the Malaysian company, but it's developed by a local.
Parkinson's, was it?
Parkinson, yeah.
So that's been changed. Hands have changed.
Hands have changed.
Long time building. So
well, watch this space. CBRE will be giving you a lot more information on that in the coming months.
Okay, that wasn't very public though. I didn't know. When I saw Mega Mall, I said that building looks like the Parkinson building.
It's a great building. It's pretty much finished. We're just going through the design process at the moment. So exciting project. I'm really looking forward to seeing that.
So is that going to, when I have to go to the airport, am I going to have problems?
Absolutely not.
With the traffic from the
infrastructure on that project is really strong. So it's been well thought through, well designed. No issues there. No.
Okay, so retail. I noticed you sort of mentioned restaurants. There'd be a lot of FM, which is there always is because people go to the malls to eat. There's no doubt about that. Business owners thinking about it. Obviously, of course, we expect to see the Browns and the Domino's pizzas and pizza companies and all those guys go into every mall and Starbucks, if not one or two or three Starbucks. Young guys sort of saying, what would you encourage them to? Because one of the issues always with retail space, especially high-end retail space, and we see it in any mall. There's stores opening, there's stores closing, and it seems to be rent is a really major issue, and getting the traffic through to make a business. Would you encourage businesses to start thinking about those that are in retail, whether they're in clothing or food? Is this the place to be as a mall as opposed to a good location in the corner of somewhere.
Well, I think the numbers speak for themselves, and actually tomorrow we're holding a joint retail event with DFDL to talk more about this. But Cambodia is actually up there in the top 10 of world rankings for new retail entrants into the market, which is a very impressive place to be. And apart from our GDP growth, it's really strong to see that coming through.
The kingdom is doing well in every slide. That's great news. It's the place to be.
And the F&B is leading that charge. So in Cambodia, food and beverage, F&B, is very key.
So would you expect new franchises to come in?
Yeah, absolutely. We expect that to continue. There's plenty more to come. We have no Zara, we have no H&M yet.
We have a Subway.
We need some of those.
Where is Subway?
Yeah.
One of my favorites. McDonald's. Subway's is one of my favorites. Still, and I'm sorry, Fat Boys is just as good, but Subway's, yeah. So it's key areas. I guess the Mega Mall, the Midtown Mall, the Nora Mall, the Olympia Mall, the park. So
they're all quite spread out for the next 12 months.
So it seems there's going to be a glut of malls open. What happens? I mean, do we have the traffic is going to have to start decreasing in the other aeons, I guess, on the macros?
Well, they're all targeting slightly different things. So many of these are what we call community malls, and they're generally smaller retail spaces. So they might be up to about 15,000 square meters of space. They're usually serving a smaller catchment area than Aeon, and they're usually for a more immediate type of service provision. So you may go
it's like in Bangkok. People have been to Bangkok. You don't have these. You have your central malls, which is just so vast, extensive, right? And then you have the smaller malls.
Yeah. You can go there quickly if you've got half an hour and you want to grab a coffee or get a bite to eat, or you need to pick up some groceries. You need to go to the pharmacy or a bookstore just quickly. They're not a destination as such. You may go there more often, more frequently than you may go to an Aeon. So it will change the way that the city works slightly.
They're more locales, right? I mean, more local for people in those areas.
Yeah, absolutely.
They don't have to go to Aeon to go to a mall. No. And they'll have cinemas and they'll have all the chains.
Yeah.
And
Often
they all look alike after a while. It's the same stores and the same...
Yes, that can be a risk, but actually with community malls in particular, the tenant mix is very carefully calibrated. So there's a lot of thought that goes into who's going to be there, and they are there to serve the immediate community. So there's a lot of study that goes on, and our retail team are quite experienced at doing this now. We look at the local community. What is the demand? Who is active in that area? So what businesses are there? What schools? What universities? Who lives there? And we try and calibrate that tenant mix to really appeal to the local population, because we know that's where the majority of the catchment is going to come from. Okay.
Well, covered the deck. So let me just make a suggestion what I'd like to see on next year's deck.
Sure.
I mean, it's all great that we're developing malls and retail spaces and office buildings and big satellite cities, but we need to bring a little bit more culture into the world, which I think you've seen in places like Singapore.
Yep.
I'm not saying we need to have an opera house, but I would like to see stadiums, possibly for sports facilities, theaters, playhouses, or whatever you want to call that, and parks. We haven't, not one thing on parks, recreation areas. Is this part of urban planning to...
Yes. Obviously, no developer will develop a park on its own, because it doesn't make any money. And the developer's primary
have to live in the concrete jungle, right?
is to ensure that they make the best return for their investors. Right. Yes, it's down to urban planning, and the regulations need to be put in place in order to ensure that is delivered.
We hear about green buildings. I mean, is this, I guess some of these buildings that I've seen, and maybe not in Cambodia, but some areas of greenery for people to sort of, on lunch hours, to go outside. And so nothing really planned like that.
There are some. Yes, and developments like The Point, which is a mixture of office and retail, that has a beautiful garden area, very well landscaped, will be a very nice place to go and relax. Other developments like One Park, they have garden space above their retail and car parking podium. The trouble with that is it's somewhat inaccessible to to local people. You have to travel up an elevator to get out into a garden. Sometimes they're controlled just for occupants of the building. So having publicly accessible open space, and we can see this when you go to the riverside in the evening or you go close to an open space, it's in really high demand in Phnom Penh, and it's imperative that those kind of amenities are delivered.
And we have to have places to go to relax besides to live and to shop. So I hope there's some, besides public transportation, I hope to see that also.
Yeah, it's really important public amenity, and I think the satellite cities are part of solving that solution in that their top-down planning process will allow that kind of delivery. And I think we'll start to see that in places like Phnom Penh city centre.
Okay, well, James, thank you so much. It was really an incredible time to spend together. I'm sure people took a lot away from this. Is this available on your website, or is it still secret?
Our full deck, which is about twice the size of this, is available on our website under our research section. It's called the Fearless Forecast 2019, and that will give you an even more in-depth view of Phnom Penh's real estate market.
Well, thanks for being on our last show. I hope to see something Cambodia Business Week on another venue someday. But until then, signing off on our last show, and thanks for being our last guest.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.